Good evening. Welcome to the Singapore Embassy, and a particularly warm welcome to Ambassador Katherine Tai, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening, because it was actually meant to be a women's event. But because it was a trade event, they said you might as well do it as well. And I'm particularly honored that you've chosen to do this at the Singapore Embassy here in Washington, D.C. I would like to congratulate the Asia Society Policy Institute and Silverado Policy Accelerator for launching this inaugural professional development program for emerging leaders from ASEAN. It's particularly relevant that you are focusing on trade and trade ties between the US and ASEAN. The Southeast Asia region is looking forward to greater economic engagement with the United States. Let me speak briefly about gender equality and inclusion in ASEAN and women's empowerment in Singapore. In our region, despite considerable progress, women still continue to face hurdles posed by pervasive social norms and traditional gender expectations. Women in ASEAN generally have lower levels of labor participation, are concentrated in lower-skilled, vulnerable jobs, often in the informal sector, and are paid less for the same work. COVID has not helped and made these gender and social inequalities even more prevalent. And advancing this gender equality means extra for GDP. It's not just about the ideal of equality, it really makes sense in terms of sustainable development and economic development. And it's the focus of all ASEAN member countries. What needs to be done and what the governments are doing is trying to codify legislation to ensure fair workplace practices and increased opportunities for women in the workplace. Businesses obviously can play a role and are championing the values and ethos to support equal participation in the region. And between ASEAN and the US as well, we do have an ASEAN gender mainstreaming strategic framework where actions such as development of regional plan of action to advance women, peace and security agenda are addressed. In Singapore, even as a globalized city, things are not always as inclusive as we like it to be. We do have this vision of a fairer and more inclusive society where men and women can partner as equals, but it's still sometimes a work in progress. That's why in 2021, the government celebrated it as the Year of Singapore Women, and it concluded a year of conversations on Singapore women's development to understand Singaporeans' aspirations and ideas, how to further advance women in Singapore. Informed by these year-long conversations and insights, the government developed a white paper on Singapore's women's development, the first whole-of-society review. I'm happy to share that earlier this month, the Singapore Parliament endorsed the white paper on the day, in fact, that Ambassador Tai met the Prime Minister at Parliament House, because there was a day-long debate about that white paper, and it signals a promising start towards a more fairer and inclusive society. That white paper sets out 25 collective actions by the government and the community. There will be a midpoint review, and that will be conducted in 2027, and it means to conclude that work in 10 years' time. So having this program is really quite important, even for a place like Singapore. And to conclude, I'd like to applaud this initiative by ASPI and the opportunity it allows for female leaders from ASEAN. I'd like to welcome my friend Wendy Cutler, Vice President of ASPI and Managing Director of its Washington office, to come up and deliver the remarks. Well, Wendy, please.
Well, thank you very much. Ambassador Mirpuri and your team at the embassy, you've been such great partners, not only for this event, but to the Asia Society throughout the years, and we're extremely grateful. We're glad to have a great turnout today, and with so many close friends and colleagues. And I see some folks in the audience, including a former boss of mine, Ambassador Carla Hills. She trained me early on in my career. And other friends from USTR, the National Security Council, the State Department, and the ambassadors from Australia, Cambodia, and Indonesia. Thank you so much for joining us. And Ambassador Ted Osius, hopefully you're here. Yes. Oh, there you are. Thanks for joining us as well. So now on to the program. As Ambassador Mirpuri emphasized, ASEAN is one of the world's most dynamic and diverse regions in the world. Trade has really driven its development and its prosperity. And ASEAN economies have made great strides in expanding opportunities for women to participate in the workforce while continuing to open doors for women to help shape the region's future. However, challenges do remain in bridging the gender gap. In legislatures around ASEAN, women only account for 20% of the positions. And in the private sector, women comprise only about 1/4 of middle and senior managerial positions. And moreover, only about 55% of women in the ASEAN region participate in the labor force, compared with almost 80% for men. And of the women in the labor force, as Ambassador Mirpuri emphasized, about 2/3 are in the informal sector, which has been disproportionately hurt by COVID. To be clear, though, these challenges are not unique to ASEAN. The United States and others have considerable progress to make as well. And as noted by the McKinsey Global Institute, Southeast Asian countries have moved closer to achieving gender parity than their neighbors in East and South Asia. The WTO Director General Ngozi recently stated that women must be at the front and center in the economy and in trade as we seek to recover from the pandemic. And I couldn't agree more. So today, the Asia Society Policy Institute is pleased to launch Building Trade Ties with ASEAN's Emerging Female Leaders. This initiative aims to support the professional development of ASEAN's next generation of female trade negotiators and experts by providing training and mentorship opportunities. The program will culminate this fall with a 10-day long program in the United States, starting in Washington, D.C., going to New York, and then to San Francisco and Silicon Valley, featuring workshops and briefings with trade experts, current and former government officials, and female leaders in the finance, technology, and media sectors. Believe it or not, we've received over 120 applications from all over the region. And from there, we're going to select 12 finalists, or 14 finalists, which is proving very difficult because as we look through these applications, the credentials are amazing and the enthusiasm that comes forward through their applications is evident. We're currently pursuing similar programs with Japan and Korea, and our vision is to bring all these women together in Asia and help really establish the networks. The Silverado Policy Accelerator shares our vision, and we are grateful for the support they're offering for the program. And it's my pleasure now to introduce Maureen Hinman, Silverado's co-founder and executive chair, to offer a few comments. Maureen?
Thanks, Wendy. Great job. Thank you so much, Wendy, Ambassador Mirpuri. It is such a pleasure to be here standing before all of you today. When I founded the Silverado Policy Accelerator a little under 2 years ago, I wanted to make sure that we focused not only on advancing the best policy solutions to our most pressing global challenges, but that our work also helped create career pathways for the next generation of leaders. And as I sit in this room today, I'm reminded of the importance of that component to our mission. And here's why. Among us today are current and former USTRs, current and former negotiators, current business leaders, ambassadors, think tank wonks, and young trade policy professionals, which means that everyone in this room has either started, accelerated, or been a beneficiary of the awesome network of female trade professionals in Washington. In fact, I am here today because my friend and mentor and former assistant USTR, Jennifer Prescott, asked her friend and mentor, the formidable, legendary negotiator, Wendy Cutler, to workshop negotiating strategies with then Ouster Prescott's staff. I know my own career has been more successful by an order of magnitude because of the interventions and support of other women in the field, whether that was gaming out a strategy for an upcoming trade round or figuring out how to juggle a baby, a pregnancy, and a full-time job at USTR. emphasis on the full time. Humor aside, we all know that the network of women, those who have come before us, those who are coming along with us, and those who are coming up behind us, is instrumental to all of our collective success, both as negotiators and as women, working to build a more inclusive global economy while juggling big professional and personal responsibilities. And this is actually the point of the Asia Society Policy Institute's program to build trade ties with ASEAN's emerging female leaders. The purpose of this program is to seed the kind of dynamic professional network of women in the ASEAN region we benefit from here in Washington. Today, we have the distinct pleasure of having Ambassador Katherine Tai with us to launch this program. Ambassador Tai has kept workers, and female workers in particular, top of mind in developing and executing our trade policy agenda. And I recall the wave of excitement that coursed through the Washington trade community when Ambassador Tai was first nominated for the job. That excitement was not only because Ambassador Tai has a reputation as a brilliant trade policy mind, but also because she has established herself as a trusted broker on a range of trade policy issues that are relevant to women, including those related to labor and the environment. I cannot think of a better female leader to kick off this important effort, and it is my honor to introduce the 19th United States Trade Representative, Ambassador Katherine Tai. Following, please. Ambassador Tai will take a few questions from the audience after her remarks. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Tai to the podium.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Ambassador Mirpuri, for having me and for putting together this excellent and important event. I also want to thank Ambassador Mirpuri for hosting this event at the embassy. Singapore is one of our most important trading partners, not just in the Indo-Pacific region, but in the world. I visited Singapore for the first time, not just as the USTR, but for the first time ever for me, just 2 weeks ago. And during my 2 days there, I met with Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, my Singapore trade counterpart, Minister Gan, and had a number of really productive and thoughtful ministerial level meetings, including with Environment and Sustainability Minister Grace Fu, which we did while we were taking a walk through the beautiful botanical gardens, which really leaves a lasting impression for me. It is fitting that we gather at the Singaporean Embassy to discuss the importance of empowering women in ASEAN member states and lifting up female leaders in this region. Singapore has made noticeable progress in narrowing the gender gap and ushering in an era of greater empowerment and equality for women. And in fact, that is absolutely correct. I met the Prime Minister at the Parliament because he was there for the day of debate around that white paper on women's development in Singapore. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that our new ambassador to Singapore, Ambassador Kaplan, really wanted me to appreciate the historic nature of the day that I was there, and also have me understand why I was meeting with the Prime Minister in the legislature. It really was historic, and it was an honor to be there. During Singapore's 2020 elections, a record number of women candidates ran for office, and as a result, today, nearly 30% of the seats in Singapore's parliament are represented by women, compared to 20% of parliamentary seats across ASEAN member states and 27% of seats here in the United States Congress. Women are taking on more leadership roles in Singapore, as evidenced by Minister Fu leading the Ministry of Sustainability and the Environment, and Minister Teo leading the Ministry of Communications and Information. Still, we all know that there is more work to do for us here in the United States and for the ASEAN countries. In February, ASEAN and the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women published the ASEAN Gender Outlook. The report offers a look at the progress ASEAN member states have made towards gender equality, the region's sustainable development goals, and the ASEAN Community Vision 2025. Last October's joint statement of the 4th ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Women emphasized that, and I quote, Women fulfill key roles in building and sustaining resilience, and women, both in rural and urban settings, are not merely victims who are affected by the pandemic, disasters, and changes in the climate. They are active agents for transformative change. Indeed, we must activate women across ASEAN to bring about that transformative change. While we are seeing signs of progress, greater political representation, increased access to education, there is still a wide gap between our ambitions and reality, and that is why this gathering is so important. It represents a commitment and a vision by all of us towards lifting up women and emerging leaders across the region. Last year, I traveled to Seoul, Korea, and joined a roundtable hosted by Ambassador Yu, the first woman to hold the position of Minister for Trade in the Republic of Korea. Our discussion featured an impressive group of women leaders in trade policy from the public and private sectors. Together, we had a candid conversation about our shared experiences, the challenges we have faced throughout our careers, and how we can be mentors to the next generation of leaders. And I really want to share with all of you that in that roundtable discussion, Minister Yu shared with me and with our chargé that in her career, one of her role models and inspirations was our first woman U.S. Trade Representative, Ambassador Carla Hills, and that she had seen Ambassador Hills and the incredible, phenomenal force of nature that she is, and that really empowered her to pursue her own career. And as a result of that discussion, our embassy in Seoul launched a new program to connect rising women leaders with mentors in their respective field. These platforms and networks give us the space to forge genuine connections between the generations. A woman just starting her career can benefit immensely by hearing the advice and wisdom of a peer with more, if not decades of experience. I know this from firsthand experience throughout my career, and of some of the women who have been already named earlier. I have had outstanding mentors and people who helped me professionally. In turn, in my personal capacity, I love giving advice and serving as a sounding board for women, and particularly Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander women. The Biden-Harris administration believes that trade can be an important tool to advance our gender equity goals, and that is why USTR's trade agenda incorporates the values and objectives of the President's National Strategy on Gender Equity and Equality. We are proud to support ASEAN member states that continue to push ahead to fulfill their SDGs and empower women to create that transformative change. If we can accomplish this, the possibilities are truly endless. ASEAN is collectively our fourth largest trading partner, and the region has a combined GDP of over $3.3 trillion. Imagine what the possibilities are for our trading relationships if women in the region have more representation and more economic opportunities. In short, it is in all of our interests for women across ASEAN to succeed and thrive. And that is why we hosted an ASEAN-US Best Practices Exchange on women-owned micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises and e-commerce in March to share ideas on how our trade agenda can help women-owned businesses benefit from the evolving digital economy. And it is also why USTR organized a second ASEAN-US Trade and Labor Dialogue to ensure that workers, including our women workers, are included in the policymaking process. By giving everyone a seat at the table, we can ensure the policy outcomes are more inclusive, more durable, and more equitable. Our commitment to this issue is clear, and we look forward to working with ASEAN and sustainable economic growth. And as a final point, I just want to say, with respect to those of us who work in trade policy, I think that there is a special connection with the empowerment of women, of those who have been underrepresented, and to overcome systemic and structural barriers, because at the root of everything we do in trade, our common principles are those of non-discrimination and of prosperity and opportunity for all. So I'm very, very proud to be a part of this conversation. With that, I will turn things back over to Wendy as we explore some of these topics in greater detail. Thank you so much. over here? Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Those were really insightful and inspirational points. A few questions from me, and then we're going to take some from the audience, and then we're going to go out and drink and eat. So, Ambassador Tai, maybe my first question will be on APEC. The U.S. will be hosting APEC next year. APEC has done a lot of groundbreaking work on women's empowerment issues. I know it's kind of early to ask you what the themes for our year of APEC will be, but do you think this issue will feature prominently on the APEC agenda?
I'm quite confident that the values and the priorities of the Biden administration writ large will feature in that APEC year. And so you're right, where we are right now, there's a lot of conversation about the setup for 2023, but I feel very confident that this will be strongly represented in our agenda.
Have you picked a city to host the leaders meeting yet? Can I slip that in?
Someone is picking a city.
Okay. That's a good answer.
Okay.
You mentioned the Biden-Harris administration's national strategy, let me get the title right, on gender equity and equality, and this was announced last October. And my understanding is there's lots of pillars in that, including improving economic security, advancing democracy, rights, and full participation by ensuring women's participation in social, economic, civic, and political life. Now, I also understand each agency kind of plays a role in furthering these objectives. Can you share with us a bit more about what's USTR's role here?
Absolutely. So we came into this administration at USTR with real focus on how trade policy can reach everyone. And at USTR, that means innovating in terms of being more, it's not that we haven't done this before, but it's about being more intentional and mindful about how we do it. And so with respect to the gender equity work, it is for us about how we can take all of the areas where USTR is agile and able and ensure that we are reaching, whether it's in our public outreach, whether it's internally, whether it's in looking at collecting data and having that inform our trade policy work, taking an approach that is mindful and intentional and ensuring that it is a lasting innovation for our trade policy.
I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and again, I think USTR has such an important role to play. Maybe I can ask you a little, you talked about the importance of mentorship for you, receiving mentorship, but also you've been a mentor to so many women, and I know there's so many women in the trade field that look to you now and are just amazed and inspired because you started as a career person at USTR, and here you are, head of a cabinet agency on trade, leading the president's trade agenda, an incredible accomplishment during a relatively short career. So maybe I can ask you, maybe you can share with us what attributes, what characteristics helped you, and would you, if you were to give advice to these young women who will be coming to the United States from Asia, what advice would you offer them as they start plotting out their careers in trade?
Sure. I bring with my own self-awareness a lot of appreciation for how fortunate I have been to have had the mentors, to have grown up essentially professionally at USTR, to have benefited from incredible role models. Wendy, you are part of a core of women ousters, assistant USTRs, who are really awe-inspiring for people like me, who are human and enabling of growth for those of us on your teams, but also incredibly fierce and relentless at the negotiating table. So let me just share that, and I feel like I'm very, very lucky. I'll also, just from my own experience, share with all of you that it doesn't escape my notice that my story is a bit unlikely and unusual to come up through the ranks of career staff. to have made the transition over to the Hill, where I got my political education, and then to end up back as the political head of this agency. And I think, this is something that I know is changing and will change over time. But I think that it does matter that I have come up through the ranks as a technical expert. And that in terms of making that transition and being, having our society become used to seeing women as leaders, that one of these initial paths is for those of us to carve out our space as experts in a technical field. And I don't know if this is fair, and I haven't done a scientific or database study of this, but I do think that at USTR, I'm actually the fourth woman to lead the agency. I think that it's not an accident that this is an agency where technical experience and expertise is really of paramount importance. So, that's not to say that this is right. And I think that you will see more women leaders come up through the ranks, recognized for their leadership skills, not necessarily tied to technical expertise, but I think that has been part of it, and I do expect that will transition.
But it's a hard transition to go from being a technical expert to then getting into the political world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And how about taking risks? Because you have been a risk taker in your career. You had a comfortable career at USTR. And a lot of people, they get comfortable in their careers and they don't want to do something different. What went through your mind before you went to Capitol Hill when you were offered a job there?
That's a great question. Wendy, I don't know if you remember this, but I had announced that I was leaving, and I ran into you in the second floor bathroom. It was very democratic. Everybody uses the same bathrooms at USTR. And we were chatting, and you said, well, I see that you're leaving, good luck, and please be nice to us when you're on the Hill. But I do remember, I think there are a number of people who scratched their heads and just thought, are you sure you want to do this? It's a little rough and tumble up on the Hill for all of you who have had interactions with the Hill. I think that for me, what was really important from my perspective was I love learning, and I have loved being in school all the years that I have been in school. But when I say that I grew up at USTR, I also really feel like I had this incredible education at USTR. I was there for 7 years. And when I left, I was looking for an opportunity to expand my education. And I think that this is actually very specific to the way trade policy is done in our governmental system, which is the executive branch has a lot of know-how and has a lot of reach in terms of negotiations, in terms of working with other countries. But because the foreign commerce authority is given to the Congress, at the end of the day, the rubber hits the road on trade policy where policy and politics intersect. And that was a very powerful driver for me. And I thought, there's a limitless road for me to travel to become better at being a trade litigator. But I also have always been inspired by the denizens of USTR on the second floor. That's where all the politicals sit, and their ability to dial into a conversation that until I went up to the Hill seemed completely illogical and nonsensical to me, which is all about the trade politics. And I thought, unless I try to learn what's going on there, I don't think I'll ever be fully engaged in trade policy making.
Mary, I think you make an excellent point there, because in order to be effective at trade policy, you need to know the politics. Okay, I could go on forever. I'm going to open the floor up. We have a microphone that will be brought to you. So would anyone like to ask a question? Okay.
Hi.
Penny.
Am I allowed to take my mask off to ask a question? Because I don't have a voice that works real well through masks. Sorry.
Oh, can you introduce yourself, Penny?
Sure, I can. Hi, I'm Penny Noss. I'm with UPS. Thank you very much for all of this. And I love this program. I love the mentorship aspect of it, as well as the capacity building aspect of it, because I think that's incredibly important. At UPS, we've been really focused on exactly this, on capacity building for exporters, on helping to drive market access, but then also to think about the rules and the regulations that are out there. So at the WTO, we've seen some advances in the past year with the domestic regulation text that included a phrase that the US supported to eliminate discrimination between men and women in the provision of licenses for services. And I'm just curious, as I look through the announcement from Friday, I was trying to think through the specifics of trade policy and where are the areas that we can really operationalize the gender equality and equity ideals that we hold, because it's been a lot of best practice sharing, it's been a lot of data collection, and I'm just wondering, are there other areas that we could really be digging into that would really have an impact and be helpful? Thank you.
That's a great question. It's a powerful one. I think in terms of the data collection, I'll just focus there for a moment because I know you said aside from, but I think that area is really critical because coming in to USTR, part of what we're trying to do, and one way of thinking about what we're trying to do is to democratize trade policy making. And that's with respect to the small, medium enterprises. That's with respect to our trying to expand the table in terms of our stakeholder outreach. But ultimately, I think it is also about thinking through trade policy as something that is really powerful and can reach a lot of people. How can we do that better? And part of the issue is, I don't think we've ever asked that question so pointedly. And because we haven't asked that question, Penny, I think that the answer is, until we have that data, and until we know, what data we ought to be collecting, we're going to be going by feel and instinct. But we feel strongly in this administration that our policy should be based on fact and evidence. And that's why I keep coming back to this data point, because it is going to be critical in shaping our approaches. But beyond that, I think that, there's just the human element of this. I mean, we talked about a worker-centered trade policy. It's really about being intentional and mindful about the fact that trade policy impacts people and communities. And, on that front, then we also want to be thinking about who are the people that we are engaging with, and who are the people on our side who are doing the engagement. At USTR, in addition to the gender equity piece, we are also asking the larger question around diversity, equity, inclusion that goes beyond gender. It's all part of the same theme of ensuring that we are knitting together our trade policies and these what can feel like very wonky areas with how they are impacting the experience of our fellow human beings.
Other questions? Jennifer?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Prescott, and I am with Amazon Web Services, but I'm also a USTR alum, very proudly. As Maureen mentioned very kindly in her remarks, also just want to say congratulations on this amazing program. I think it's going to be fantastic. Having worked with many of these female negotiators, as you and others know, Wendy, probably not as common as any of us, would have liked to have seen, in the region. And so it's just really exciting to see this whole new generation that's going to be coming up and that's going to be mentored and be able to grow through this program. But maybe I just wanted to build on, I had sort of a somewhat similar question to Penny's about the equity action plan that USTR released last week. And in particular, I was focusing on, one of the objectives about strengthening and improving the data in order to really better understand and consider the distributional effects of trade, right, on, all of the different populations. And so my question is, can you talk a little bit more about that and how the private sector can help you all to better develop some of that data and some of the methodologies, and how can we help support it?
Absolutely. I find that our private sector actually, in many ways, further ahead of where we are as a government in terms of asking questions around, how to be more effective, how to be more sustainable. It's been interesting these past couple years, especially with a real focus on sustainable economic and business practices. I think that our private sector is way ahead of where we are in government in terms of understanding that in order to continue to be successful, there needs to be a path to sustainability, and that if things continue as they are, that path is going to be very, very short. But also with respect to people policies, especially with a very tight labor market, I have found in my conversations that our private sector partners are very, very dialed into the question of how can we support our workers better. Workers are a pool of talent that we have to compete for. How do we have better retention rates? How do we persuade our workers and our next generation that it is worth it for them to continue to invest their talents and their time here? And I think, in that regard, then I trust that our private sector will have access to data and also practices and wisdom in general to share with us in terms of how we can orient to inform our policies. So I thank you for asking that question. I know that Amazon, I think, must have tons of data, but data relevant to these questions too, and would very much like to be able to partner. And I think that in addition to the work that we are doing, we've also asked the ITC to conduct a study. We've asked them to ask these questions, and I think that today was the last of their public roundtables. I really encourage everyone to engage with the ITC and contribute whatever wisdom you have so that we can have the most meaningful information and findings come out of that.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Who would like to be that lucky person? Yes, Ted.
Thank you so much. Ted Osius with U.S. ASEAN Business Council, founded and shepherded by Rod and Carla Hills. I wanted to ask about digital trade. When we look at the spectacular growth in the part of the world that I'm focused on, and the growth particularly in SMEs as a result of the fast-growing digital economy, we see tremendous opportunities, I think, for inclusion. Most of that growth is taking place in the small and medium enterprises, many of which are led by women. So my question is, will the administration be able to use the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework to set the rules for digital trade to make sure that the internet economy is an inclusive economy?
Yes.
Better than to ask a yes/no question to an experienced trade negotiator.
Yes, I think that is very much the intention. And in terms of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, let me say a little bit more. We've made clear it's not a traditional trade agreement negotiation, and that's very much by design. The trade pillar is one of 4 pillars. This is reinforcing our notion that trade policies are effective when they are coordinated with other policies. And so you see that in addition to trade, and these are all interconnected, by design. We will also be engaging in conversations around infrastructure, supply chains, and then also tax and anti-corruption issues. So there's a suite of issues that we are bringing as part of our program. In trade in particular, there are, I think, 7 components, and I'm not going to test myself here at the end of the day to make sure I hit all of them, but digital is actually absolutely part of it. You know, the practice that we as the United States bring to linking labor and environment rules to ensure that trade can be a force, an incentive for the raising of standards around the world. That is very much part of our focus, and it really is to bring a program on economic engagement that's responsive to a lot of the challenges that we know we are struggling with and that our partners are also struggling with in this region. And those relate to the need for economic policies that promote sustainability, resilience, our competitiveness, and then absolutely our inclusiveness. And I think even before the latest trade and supply chain disruption that has happened in Eastern Europe, dealing with the COVID pandemic, we have been very tuned into what is both a challenge and opportunity, which is as we are all pushing to come out of this disruptive period, to work towards an economic recovery, both here at home and also internationally. We know that there is a risk, but also an opportunity that we don't want to miss in terms of the opportunity, which is to bring along the most vulnerable populations within our own countries and also around the world, and to be very sensitive to the risk that we leave those who are behind even further behind. And you know, with all of the disruption and the uncertainty and the deficit of confidence that we have in the global economy right now, I think that there is absolutely something that we can do together to try to make sure that the new world economic order that we are working towards is one that is better than the one that we've left behind.
You know, you'd mentioned earlier the importance of strong assistant USTR women at the Winder Building. And I see Dawn Shackelford, who is kind of hidden away, and we have the transition now with the IPAF. So Dawn is next generation, such a great assistant USTR leading the career efforts on IPAF. So someone you all want to get to know when we move to the atrium. With that, Ambassador Tai, thank you so much. This has been just inspirational to hear your thoughts and your plans. And thanks for your support for this program on behalf of the Asia Society Policy Institute, so the Silverado Policy Accelerator. Just thank you so much. And we hope that as this program pursues, that we can tap you into the program. And particularly when you visit Asia, that we can get you to meet with these women that we're training and mentoring, because I think that would be an incredible treat for them and very special.
Count me in.
Okay.
I'm there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.